Hello, everyone. And I will be waiting for a few people to join in. So I will be here. Oh, wow. There they are. A whole bunch. All right. There's Lisa and Richard and Jonathan. Excellent. Taylor's back. Okay. Listen up, folks. I'm going to bring everyone into the conversation because today this is not so much a presentation on my end as it is an open discussion about why we make things beautiful and the role of the arts in everyday life. The picture I posted was taken on a walk I took with my family, a 7-kilometer walk around Henneth this weekend, and it was on the door of I think a field that had cows or horses or something. And somebody made that there, which I thought was lovely. So I'm going to start bringing everyone in as panelists. And again, bear with me as I do this. It always takes a moment because I have to do each one individually. And where's Klaus? And I see some new names, new faces here. This is lovely.
Good afternoon, Julian.
Good afternoon. Nice to see you.
Hi, Julian.
Hey, Brian, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Deep discussion with my staff today about if it makes sense to keep the gallery going at all. It was more a rhetorical question than anything else, but it's challenging times require challenging conversations.
Do that.
Good to see everybody.
Wow, there's a lot more people today.
Yeah. See, I'm becoming more popular. It's because people can't see my shoes. If everyone saw my shoes, Dave wouldn't be here.
I highly doubt that. I feel like every time I see your shoes, you're always wearing something super fancy.
Now I actually have to show them, don't I? Should I? They're not fancy.
Yes.
There's my foot.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Jonathan, I love those vintage Apple computers behind you.
They are my late mother's when she first got her first Apples, and my father was going to give them away before he passed, and I said, absolutely not. I want them.
Right.
Oh, yes.
Those are awesome.
I remember programming on an Apple IIc back in the day.
I have a letter which I will post on my website for everyone from my mentor, the photographer Fred Ward. And he wrote me a letter back in the 70s saying, all you need is an Atari. That'll do enough for you and to do all the programs you'll ever need.
Yeah, this exponential growth of technology was not a term back in the day. So
there was no Photoshop then either.
Yeah, true.
Would you share your website with us? Your web address, or
yeah, post it in the chat, Jonathan.
Oh, okay.
Everyone can grab it and have a look.
Be happy to. Let me find the chat thingy.
All right, so my topic today, so we can get right into it, is why art and why we make things beautiful or don't. And of course, the arts as a consumer have very much to do with how we decorate, how we enhance our environment. And as an artist, it has very much to do with how we envision beauty, or how we retain ideas of beauty or contradictions to beauty. And I'm understanding the term beauty not in the socioeconomic sense of how it's bound to a particular classification, but literally things that are pleasant to the eye, things that we find attractive, that we find engaging, like the shape and the shadow fall of an egg, a hard-boiled egg in the morning when the sun shines through the window, and how the shadows soften around the backside of it because the sun has a curious way of throwing shadows because of the broadness of its source of light. And I do a lot of street photography when I'm traveling, which I obviously haven't been doing recently, where I see street art, but not street art in the sense of graffiti like we know it, like when you see a subway car that's completely covered, or you see these large murals, which are very involved. And those are certainly worth a conversation, but that's a very specific form. What I'm talking about much more is little notes, like vignettes that people create on construction sites, or little drawings where they change something they see. Like you see someone, I mean, the classic one of putting a tongue on a poster, like someone sticking their tongue out, which is kind of stupid, but I mean, or adolescent, if you will. It's not really engaging, but the desire to do that, and the desire to engage and to beautify our environment, to alter it to fit a particular reality that we like to see. I think that's a very interesting topic. And for me, it touches a lot on the real worth of art, removed from the fiscal worth. Because after you've paid for the artwork, and have had your nightmares about what you're not going to be able to pay for because it was so expensive, and you've actually found out that you could pay for it and that you didn't get evicted, then you have this thing, and why did you buy that? Like, what made that happen? And I think that that's really important, that people who are looking, who are on kind of the edge of buying art, or on the edge of engaging in that process and discovering that kind of enrichment to their lives, they're sitting on the edge and they're not understanding maybe what it means to do that. What's to pay out beyond, and you're gonna have to excuse me, it may get loud from my end. So if the background noise gets too noisy, please let me know and I'll go on mute unless I'm speaking. There's a construction site out in front of my gallery, which is, and I've got single pane glass. So it's either that or I go into the bathroom and talk from there.
A lot of people are doing podcasts from their bathrooms, yes.
Ambient sound, yes.
Yes. I aim to give the full oral experience. It's like being in New York City, because there's always some jackass with a jackhammer in New York City breaking something somewhere that you can hear, right? Okay. So that's the big question today, and I'd like to leave this open as a discussion, much more than a monologue of any sort. I've kind of thrown the stone in the pond. Let's see how many waves we can make out of a single stone throw.
I was immediately thinking when you were launched into that topic that I was thinking of the ruins of Pompeii, that far back, and even further, but. There's graffiti that we've uncovered in Pompeii. Some of it erotic, some of it about politicians. I mean, and these were the workers who were creating the spaces that got obliterated. So I think that the impulse to create beauty exists at all levels, and different, in different skill levels, but it's an impulse that is with us, and it's pervasive, and it never goes away. So if you're thinking of reaching deep into your pocket and pulling out a lot of coin to buy a work of art, I think it speaks to that impulse. I think it means that, it's not practical. It's not going to feed you. I had this running debate with somebody in a grad school class about this, and she said, I would rather have art. I would rather, have art. It doesn't matter if I'm hungry. And I thought, come on, you got to weigh things at a certain point. You don't want to die. You don't want to perish, but it is important. And there is a pain level. There's a threshold everybody has that they're willing to pay.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
As an artist, I barter. I don't have the money to buy the things that I really, really want, but I can barter. I'm getting ready to trade a friend who makes these beautiful batiks on canvas, and he's got a large one that I want, and I've made 10 type images of him and his friends and family, and I'm getting ready to trade him a collection of those for this, I don't know, 5-foot batik that I'm going to put in my house, and it's going to be beautiful, and I'm going to enjoy it.
Oh, I think that's awesome. I mean, we've been doing that in my family for generations. The Cologne Progressive collection that we have, most of those works that ended up in August Sanders' possession ended up as such because it was payment for his reproduction work. So he would, do reproductions for whatever reason they needed, and make prints of that so that they could send them to press or, to potential clients. And then they would give him a picture. And, it's a very valid part of how this works. And I remember my dad, one of the first pieces of advice he gave me when I opened the gallery is that always offer payment plans. Always. Just offer anybody a payment plan, because it's a lot easier to, pay a little bit than to pay it all at once. And we had a number of clients in the early days, one who actually is one of my father's oldest and dearest friends, who paid for pictures he bought by driving slowly. He calculated how much gas he would need to get to work.
Wow.
And then he just drove slower and figured out how much money he was saving driving slower. And he took that money, and every week he would go to my dad's gallery and he would give him that much money. It was like, literally like shaving,
It's like making a purchase and saving the change.
Yeah, but it worked, And he's got some fantastic works, which he ended up gifting to a university collection in the end, because he became very successful and he didn't need to rely on the work. But again, he's one of these people who also, he beautified his home. He's a lawyer, so he beautified his office. He filled his office with artworks that he had purchased. I know another guy, an asset manager in New York City, who's an avid photography collector. Passionate guy. He's like, hopefully he's not watching. He looks like he's 150 years old. Literally, he's an old guy. He's such a sweetheart, but he's just an old guy, right? And his entire space is filled with beautiful art. Like the front desk is the shoddiest furniture, and his staff, like, they have good chairs, but the desks are all like 20, 30 years old, and he doesn't care about them. But in the space, there's like a Renee Dykstra, and then he's got Stephen Shore, and he's got a Christenberry group on the wall. And I walked into his office, he's got a Mapplethorpe wrapped in bubble wrap stuck beside his radiator, like between the radiator and the cabinet. He said, "Yeah, I haven't had time to unpack it yet." Like,
wow.
Yeah, but he's got the kind of money where he can do that. And Brian, speaking briefly just to your point about the bartering, the fact is that almost nobody actually has enough money to spend tens of thousands of dollars on art. It's close to nobody. It's a tiny little sliver of the market. And they have advisors who are like gatekeepers, who kind of select, prepare, and advise as they should. It's their job, and they're paid to do so, so it makes sense. But those are the people who can go in and say, "I like that. Here's a check, or here's my credit card, here's my platinum or my black card," whatever. That's the most extreme, I guess. The rest of us, including me, and everybody, I assume here, and almost everybody else you meet on the street, are all regular working people who have jobs in this or that art art related or are doing art as a passion and are doing something else to pay the bills, you know, and all of these kind of life models make sense. And, but we, you know, there's still, I still have clients like that. I have clients who come in who then save their money and then they buy something. And it really interests me to understand that motivation, because that is something that it almost goes, either it goes against the fundamental understanding that we have to keep ourselves alive, because if money ends up being the thing that represents our ability to store our labor, which is basically what it is, and we can then use that to kind of gain the thing that we would get through the labor later, meaning we didn't farm it, but we could pay somebody who did farm it so we get the vegetables kind of thing, like the simple economics of that.
Right.
And we decide not to do that. We do it, we pay for something else. Why are we doing that? What's so important about it? What are we saying to ourselves? What are we saying to our environment? Is it important? Is it valid that we validate ourselves and say, not only is this object beautiful, but I'm worth it. I'm going to do this for myself because this is something that fulfills a part of me, that speaks to a part of me, which has this desire and is looking for something to fulfill it. I see there's other people here. Ah, this is interesting. I'm going to bring these two people in. This, at the bottom, you'll see my mother and Kate. I do not know, or I don't remember, but that's because I'm horrible with names. So, Kate, if we have met, I apologize. There. Okay. So yeah, like that. And you know, so what's your take on it? I mean,
the most expensive artwork that I've ever bought is from a friend, and it's to a point you were just making about a, you know, you're finding a connection. There's something in the process of looking at it, just the work itself, that connects with you, and there's some emotional connection that is made with the work, I think. I don't think that we buy works personally. That's a different thing than what you were talking about with someone buying on behalf of someone who has enormous funds and goes in with their card and advises them. I mean, when I buy something, I have to have not only an aesthetic connection with it, but a deep personal, almost emotional connection with the work as I'm looking at it. There are certain things that it activates for me in terms of my perception of the beauty, but also my understanding about things in life, whatever slice of life that represents. I give you one example. I don't have the image that I can pull up right now, but the most expensive piece of work I ever bought was from a friend in New York. He's a painter in Brooklyn. And when I was living in Brooklyn back in the 90s, I put together an exhibition of work in a loft building I was living in. And it was one of the most fun experiences I ever had. And I thought his work was compelling at the time. And I reconnected with him on Facebook and followed his work and kept seeing these beautiful paintings that I couldn't afford. And one day I just sort of approached him and said, would you be willing to take installments on this piece? That's a point you were making, that we buy things in increments like that. And he said yes. And I said, great. So I saved aside the money as I could, and I wound up making 2 payments on it. And then he sent it to me, and I love it. It's in my house. It reminds me of his work that I like, all of his other work, but that particular time. And it's a beautiful piece. That's how it works for me. But there was a pain threshold in buying that piece that I definitely experienced.
Yeah, I actually have yet to purchase a piece of artwork. Because usually I've had people purchase mine, but what usually happens is that if I follow a lot of my friends who do art, painting, or photography, and what actually happens is that we do trades, kind of like what you were saying, Brian. So I have yet to experience the pain and joy of buying a piece of work, and but I wonder when that day will come when I see something that's like, okay, I have to have this in my house. But I'm unsure if I'll ever be able. I mean, I actually did not know that galleries take payment plans. I thought it was always you just had to have the $5,000 and bam, So that's really good to know. It's dangerous. It's also dangerous to know that. So, but yeah.
Well, maybe I can explain the economics of that and the reasoning behind it, because I think this is something that may be interesting to the viewer group that doesn't join in these conversations, but belongs to the 100+ people who end up watching this show through various channels. If I have 20 collectors who are all buying something on a payment plan, and each of them's paying me $100 a month, that's $2,000 a month. It's good money. And the work is not getting sold any more or any less by being in my gallery in the cabinet or in the flat files. And for works that are more expensive, the payments are higher, or the amount of money that people can pay varies. But it makes perfect sense, because this is, of course, it's about making money and making a living, but it's also about transporting the ideas that the art represents. And I think that that's a really smart way to do it. And there's a lot of galleries that do that. Of course, it depends a bit on how expensive the work is, how good the client relationship is, and so there's you can't just whatever walk into a gallery and say, oh, I'd love to have that Rothko. I'll just take it home and I'll pay you $100 a month, right? Because probably not going to happen. But you get the idea. And a gallerist's job is not to not sell you pictures. Like, I don't sell pictures to people, not because I don't want them to own them, but because I don't get the impression that they're buying it for the right reason, which sounds like really arrogant when I say it out loud. But, I've had a couple of young collectors come in and, be passionate about wanting to buy something. And I was worried that they were really going to get burned, that they were, attached to the idea of doing this more than they were being in love with the work that was on the wall that they were looking at. And so I recommended to them that they should take some time and come back and look at the work again and then discuss it further with me, as opposed to just closing the deal, which I could have in those situations. And one of them came back, the others haven't. And I'm glad for all outcomes, because the thing I fear most is having somebody get burned. They buy something and they end up getting stuck with something which they feel horrible about, and it reminds them of their own ineptitude. And that's stupid. Why would I, do that?
Why do you maybe? Well, I'm not playing devil's advocate, but I'm just wondering, why does that matter to you in the end?
I know you, Taylor. I know where you live.
You kind of do. You kind of do. So.
Country, anyway. City. Sorry, ask the question again. I was just being fishy.
Yeah. Okay, so why, in the end, are you looking out for people who might be too gung-ho about buying a piece of work and then getting burnt out? How does that benefit you and the gallery in the end?
Let me take a really, really long route to give you an answer to this. And not long in terms of wording, but long in terms of where the answer comes from. I have the understanding that if a collector and their engagement in the arts is ultimately successful, they will end up without any art. Because I see the role of the arts not solely in the possession, but much more in the fulfillment of the people who engage with it. Which means that the work, when the pictures have served their purpose for any given person, then they can move on and help, become something for somebody else. Which is why museums are so important, because they become kind of communal places of engagement in exactly this conversation. So the reason I watch out for people is to make sure that their understanding of what art does and what it can be isn't tainted by a negative experience that has to do with my being a gallerist and fulfilling the reputation of being a shark and just being interested in money. And it's one of these really tough things. Like all of us, I can't live without money, or I can't live without a roof over my head and food. To be most direct about it, but we'll just wrap that all up in the idea of money and what it represents and all it can to serve. So I can't not sell pictures, because that's what I do. That's my job. So I have that requirement, and the larger my expenditure per month is, my burn rate is, the more I have to sell, clearly. On the other hand, it's not my job to sell pictures. It's my job to communicate the culture that's contained within them, the ideas that they have, which is why I'm careful with what I show. It's why I'm careful with how I show it, and that I make sure that I put things in a proper context. Because if I'm just treating it like a certificate of value, I'm basically stealing everything valuable about it. I could just as easily, send my daughter naked to the prom. It would be a similar kind of thing for me to do, which is completely ridiculous. And that I'm a bit of I think a strange cat when it comes to this particular emotional and philosophical connection to the work. But this is how I've grown up with it, and this is what it meant for me. This is, these things they come out of my own experience, and so I deal with the arts based on my own experience, which makes me a very good salesman if I really love the work, and it makes me a horrible salesman when I don't. Because if I don't get it and I don't love it, then it makes it very difficult for me to sell. And at that point, the work either sells itself or it doesn't. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but that.
Well, can I also offer an answer to that? It's just good for business. It's good for the longevity of the business. If you were in business to make a quick buck, you'd sell anything to anybody, whatever the price, but you're not.
Right.
You've got a reputation, you've got a longevity, you've got an expected future. So you can't, as they say, cut off your nose to spite your face.
Right. And there's that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I would also say that there is not enough of your view represented in the art world. I mean, I think that there needs to be more of this than the understanding of the role of the gallerist and the culture. I think that's an important thing, and I respect that.
I agree. I agree with every segment of what you just said, individually and collectively. It's a big problem. The reputation of the gallerist is that we are, cutthroats.
That's your second knife that you have with a different
It's
size.
the same knife. See, if I hold it this way, then it's the third one.
Okay, okay. I thought it was much bigger, the first one.
I've been doing this all morning.
Okay, right,
Which is why I need this, because doing it with my fingers is really annoying. It takes, anyways.
It's good catch.
Yeah, but there are, you know, it's a challenge, you know, because anybody who engages with ideological things on an ideological level and is looking for the best possible outcome for them always has to at some point deal with the reality of things not working. And you know there are you know these pop-up we discussed pop-up galleries a couple of days ago, where or you know or artist collectives, which is like the worst gallery model ever. Sorry, all of you, whoever's like a fan of artist collectives, I hate all of you. It just because it never ever works, because somebody needs to translate what you do into a language that everybody else gets. That's part of what I do. I'm like the translator. You know, the artists come and again, I know this from my youth. The artists come at the dinner table and they're sitting there, you know, fumigating about the end of the world and or you know whatever topic is on their minds, and it's always related to the very newest work that they've been doing, and everything else that's not brand new is all crap, and they don't want to talk about it, right? Right? Huh? Recognize the same? Sorry, I'm venting. Excuse me. So, you know, part of what I do is.
Well, this is why we are here, because we want to hear you vent.
Oh, there it is. So part of what I do is translate, and that's what curation is. You know, museums do this as well. Art historians do this. They put things in context and they remove the direct artistic intent and the artistic interpretation from the inside of a body of work and place it into an interpretation that's based on the view from the outside. And both views are vital. You know, the intent that the artist has is always key. It's initially and absolutely primarily important, but it is not ever the only view of a body of work unless the artist is the only person who sees it.
How do you compare visiting a studio, an artist's studio, because there's no translator? I don't have a translator.
As a person who's visiting, you really need to know what you're doing. That is not something for the uninitiated. Because most people who don't know how to understand, who aren't involved with the artistic process at some level, will not be able to decipher what's what. And it ends up becoming a very challenging conversation. If you're initiated, if you understand it, yes, absolutely. And it's a great way to do it. But that's also not the place to look at work in the sense of this is for sale and that's for sale and that's for sale and so on. That's much more about understanding what the artist is doing. Like when I go to artist studios and visit them, they show me work and I look at it and I understand at a kind of a more, 30,000 foot level, what it is that they're doing, how that work is developing, what particular threads are developing, and then I can understand greater how to deal with that work later. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
It's, yeah.
Julian, I think that's especially true, and with this contemporary art scene, because so much of it is anti-aesthetic, operating on this premise of stripping that away or reversing it, and a lot of what you see in gallery settings requires almost a statement in order for the uninitiated to even begin to get an idea of what the work is about to begin with.
Yeah.
And so that perspective of being able to cruise at the 30,000 foot level you were talking about and see that with the context that you have, these people do not have. And that might be part of what you were saying when you were talking about possibly getting burned by work, because so much of that work, and I'm not just talking about photography, but just art in general in gallery settings, is that way. It's very conceptually driven, and unless you understand that context, and they might be making an art historical reference that's important to the understanding of the work, and they're putting that into this piece they're doing.
Yeah.
Unless you have some grasp of that, you won't get what they're trying to do with it. And you'll just see the price tag and the form, and that's it.
Yeah, that's true. The modernism and postmodernism and basically action art, like conceptualism, action art, that entire development post-war, like in almost the entire world, took a stringent step away from the craft of the arts. Now, photography was accepted from this because photography is in and of itself forcibly precise. If you're taking unsharp pictures, it's because you've chosen to take unsharp pictures. Like even the out of focus is in focus in being out of focus. And that's left a lot of the art world or a lot of the buyers in the art world in kind of a quandary, because the metrics by which you can judge the quality of a given piece of work have been stripped away. You used to be able to say, like, if you looked at a Rubens, you could clearly see why that was a masterpiece because of the quality of the painting. I mean, the physical craft of making it was extraordinary. And particularly at the time when not, the entire thing with perspective and the understanding of it and the simplicity of it, because it's all math, that wasn't everyday knowledge. It is now, and so we don't think much about that. But, thinking about perfect perspective back in the day, that was a huge feat to be able to render things perspectively accurately, to see that. Because it's not like you could take a snapshot with this and then, draw it, unless you, created a camera obscura of sorts and major sketches in that, which some did. So, fast forward to now and the contemporary art market and the idea that great contemporary art must be expressive. It must be, and, throw paint on the canvas or, do thick brush strokes and manhandle, manhandle everything and make this all, this has to be out of the energy of the artist. You have to feel the strength and the aggression. You have to almost, you have to feel sorry for your washing machine if you had to wash the clothes of the artist who did this, right? Because it would be so nasty, which I think has absolutely nothing to do with it. Because in the end, as a dealer, particularly if I'm dealing with dead artists, which is almost all of my inventory is by people who have passed away already, they're never going to be able to say anything about their work except what was written somewhere. So what's left? It's the work, right? I don't know how much paint the guy got on his pants when he painted that. I know if the painting's good, or the photograph, or the drawing, or the sculpture. That's it. And it's this kind of idea that there has to be a muscularity or almost like a raw emotional content to everything belies the entire ability to speak precisely. Like, imagine if we wrote letters the way some of these painters paint paintings. Like, we would have no friends. Because it's just so, some of it is just so absolutely gut-wrenchingly brutal. And I'm not saying that that's wrong, but it's like everything seems to be that way. And that kind of makes it problematic for me because it's become a formula, and people have spoken about this, you know, formula zombieism. What was it? Jerry Salas, right? That was a term, I think zombie formalism, right? That was it. Zombie formalism was his term for it, which can be valid, but must not necessarily be valid. And it leaves the buyers, it leaves the collectors with that really nasty problem of having to figure out what it is in the artwork that's good. And there's not a lot of tools if there's not craft involved.
Well, let me ask you, where do you stand with what is frequently contemporary photography, an image that starts as a digital capture and then is manipulated in any number of different ways, and printed 4 foot by 6 foot in color and black and white or whatever? I mean, where is that in photography in your mind?
It's not photography.
Does it have to be film?
No. It's the digital medium doesn't play a role in that. When it's a painting, it's a painting with a digital brush, as is most advertising nowadays. Like, these models don't look this way, right?
Right.
Those are all paintings. They're just done with different medium. And we would be stupid not to use that. I remember I was sitting in an airplane with a strangest, Ellen von Unwert. You know, the woman who did the Guess Jeans ads, like those really blurry Guess Jeans ads back in the day. She was apparently she was a model and she loved photographing, and so she photographed all her friends, and then she took these pictures of Claudia Schiffer wearing just jeans and nothing on top, like this from the side, and that became a Guess Jeans ad. So I'm sitting with her, beside her in an airplane. Don't ask. Anyways, and I'm looking at these two pictures I had taken of this band that I had photographed. And I liked the pose of the drummer in one, and I liked the expression of the bassist in the other. And they were really close frames. There was me standing in the corner, and I would click, 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 click. And that was about the time frame when those pictures existed, all digital. And I said, so what am I going to do? Do I hang them beside each other? I said, why don't you just copy that into that? I was like, wow, yeah, why don't I? And I did. And that's how the picture came to be. And that's one of the pictures in my body of work, which no one, or almost no one, has seen. And I'm not going to show it, so don't ask, please. But it's one of the works in my body of work that became what it was because the vision required me to put two pictures together. And in that sense, it was more a painting, if you will, than it was a photograph. I don't say that in any way to devalue what it is. It's just to call that, one of these colorscape things where, it ends up becoming almost like, an LED screen where the SCSI cable is, or the whatever. Remember the SCART cables, like the jacks on the back, and if you didn't plug it in right, then like 3 of the color lines wouldn't go in, and your television would look all weird. Yeah. You've seen these pictures, right? That's not photography. That's painting.
So Susan Sontag in her On Photography had a discussion about that. Is why do we define the art by the materials used?
Yeah, exactly. Why?
Why? I mean, because you're talking about photography, but you're saying it's a painting because it's photography because of the way the image came about, but it's not.
Yeah. I've been trying to push the idea of just talking about art. Yeah. It's like me, Darius Himes, we had this conversation about this last time I was in New York, that photography is now art because it can be. And painting has been art, but there are painters who are not artists. Like the guys who paint your house are not artists necessarily. They're just painters. So saying a painter makes art doesn't fit. And saying a photographer makes art doesn't fit either, because there's a bunch of photographers out there who are photographing basketball players dunking hoops. Or
sometimes the installation in a gallery is a set of cabinets that was painted in a specific way and is meant to contextualize something else. I mean, it's all about how it's a game that artists are playing with materials now in the gallery. And we track all this back to Duchamp. I mean, blame him for doing that first move, Armat, the urinal in the Louvre, right, were submitted to the Salon of Independent Artists. I mean, to test, well, will you really accept anything? And now they refused that because it didn't meet the criteria. And then later, when it got incorporated into galleries, it was like he laughed at the gallerists because they were missing the joke.
yeah,
It's that there's a lot of games being played in contemporary art with the use of the materials and the just by putting it into a gallery, you change the rules, you change the context. I have a painter friend, also a Brooklyn artist, who named William Pojita, who is doing a series on the art world, and is sort of like a critique of everything from the 30,000 foot level down to the level of the artist working in the studio. And oh my God, how am I going to pay my electric bill? And the series of relationships that go up that chain. If you, I would say to everyone, look at that work. If you want to get an idea of the contemporary art scene and the relationships, because he almost does his paintings in a way of, it's like a flow chart that explores the relationships.
cool.
Well, all right. So you were talking about basketball photographs, for instance. Context would indicate or dictate if they were art or not, because some of those shots, sports shots or whatever, are really phenomenal works of art.
That's true.
And out of the sports pages into a gallery, it can now become art.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, it's the Trinity, man. It's the Trinity. It always comes back to the Trinity. I'm just going to call it that. That's what it is. It's a Trinity, because it's always. You're absolutely right. Context, context, context. First off, great pictures happen everywhere, in any number of mediums, and they exist for any amount of time. It could be as short as a sketch on a beach that gets washed away with the next tide. It can be as long living as something cast in whatever stone will last, or in radio, whatever. You understand what I'm saying? The art isn't art when it's not seen, I think. And the more conversations I've had, particularly here, the more I'm finding that to be validated. That it has. This is my fundamental ruling or understanding of it, that art has to do with communication, and that if it doesn't communicate to somebody, then it's unfulfilled, and as such doesn't complete itself.
Can you talk about the difference between a print and a picture?
Well, I don't see much of a difference. I know that, photographers and bookmakers or lithographers, woodblock printers, and so on, anybody who's making multiples, will do multiple runs to check to see how best to produce the print as the mechanical process of creating the artwork. But in the end, the print becomes the artwork if the artist deems it to be so, or if by some random circumstance it becomes so because of what somebody else did to it. Case in point is the portrait of Marilyn Monroe, where Bachstein used red ink and made a big X across the front of it and said, "This is a bad picture." And that picture with the red X across the front of it is the picture. If you get one without the X, it's not worth anything. The art world's not interested in it. The Mao Zedong silk screen by Warhol with the bullets in it by Dennis Hopper is a similar thing. It has an added value because of the collaborative nature of that particular object. So, brief answer again, a summed up answer is I see the print as a step before the artwork. And if the print is good, then it becomes the artwork. And if the print is bad, then the photographer should, by all reason, destroy it or get rid of it. And what was it? Helmut Newton used to do this, I think. He would send semi-fixed pictures to newspapers, so they would last long enough to do the repros for the offset, and then they would stick them in the drawer, of course, and not return them, and then come back and look at them a couple months later, and it was just a blank piece of paper.
Good idea.
I thought that was brilliant.
That's a really good idea.
Self-destruction.
It's like Mission Impossible 3.0.
Yeah.
Or actually, Mission
Last
Impossible
20 seconds. Yeah.
0.1A RC1 or something.
So a little more pointed. You're suggesting that the intent of the image makes it art, as opposed to how it's used, as opposed to hanging it on a wall. I mean, again, back to those basketball pictures. If they're hung on a wall in a gallery, a really good image can become art, or even advertising images too.
Yeah.
They intended to sell the jeans, but to make a big print, hang them on a wall in a gallery, does that make them art, or were they always art? Oh, I'm sorry. We weren't.
Are they always, or do they become? Yeah, that's.
In other words, does packaging create art out of something that wasn't intentionally art? Is that what you're asking?
Possibly, or in a case of time, an image from the 1920s is now art because A, it exists, and B, it shows something we didn't see, and it's there. I mean, before it was just a street scene, or
Well, like the World War II victory kiss, or the couple in Times Square.
Right.
Which is now, I think, considered art or considered valuable.
Yeah, which are not necessarily related.
Correct.
To answer that question, we'd have to answer the question of what is art. And that's the greasy eel that's been slipping out of everyone's hands for, centuries or decades at least. If there was a clear definition to that, to like what art is, then you would be able to regulate it.
There's a refinement to, I know it when I see it, when in the case of pornography, I think that was the reference, but if a gallerist, a respected gallerist such as you, hangs it on the wall, then it must be art.
No, I disagree. And I disagree out of my own motivation. Okay. I present work because I assume that it has meaning.
Don't you give it meaning by hanging it?
I try to.
Okay.
That's,
You do. I mean, yeah. It's you're giving it like it's a stamp of the culture,
I'm giving it a chance to have meaning. what happens to the work that doesn't get recorded somehow, someplace, like in a catalog or in an archive or in a, you know, a press clipping or something, is that it goes back into my shelf or is removed from frame, goes back into the flat files, and then goes back to its slumbering state of non-existence until somebody finds out about it, which is why I've been so active in the last weeks, trying to push all of the work that we have in our exhibitions, at least online, so that people will be able to see them. And so by doing so, I do give it a longer chance. But, you know, one of the biggest problems with selling art, as every object is unique, be it photography or painting or sculpture or anything else, is that there's one person who's the right person to for that picture at a given time. And finding that is like, it's almost like trying to find a needle in a box of needles, like finding the right needle in a box of needles. And that's the challenge of it, because if I don't find that person because I can't communicate with them, because I don't have access to them, because they don't know who I am, because they're jetting around the world at art fairs, hate art fairs, sorry, venting. Then I haven't been able to fulfill that duty, as it were. And that means that I don't know if that work then actually fulfills itself. This sounds like, I mean, it sounds like actually we're talking about philosophy. Like we could all be sitting around in Greece, like, you know, 2,000 years ago, and you know, eating olives and whatever.
Well, I mean, it's possible that art could just be individually defined, like you were saying. There's not a definition for it that everybody's going to agree on. I mean, you can talk about a certain set of characteristics or technical qualities, but when you get beyond that, you're into that zone where it's extremely hard to nail down. And
Yeah.
I think contextualizing it, putting it in a gallery, hanging it on the wall, that definitely helps. And I think that I could just say art is, if it's created as a work of art, and that's the intention of the artist, it always exists as art, whether anyone else sees it or not. It's up to the viewer to perceive it. And what you're doing, Julian, is selecting those things that you think have the greatest chance of being perceived by the people you have in mind to see that art. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair assessment of my intention. In so far as I'm successful, I have been in parts, and in other parts I have not. But yeah. And you know, this brings up, of course, one of the major issues of, again, getting back to art fair and art world speed, information speed, and all of that. The more or the faster anything moves, the shallower the information depth becomes. I had a conversation about this with Michael Summeroff some years ago. He's a photographer, son of Ben Summeroff, great photographer in of his own right, who I also represent. And we were talking about cultural depth and about being able to engage with work that isn't on the loud surface of the art world. The paid for, mega branded, mega pushed, top banner on Artsy, advertising on the right bar of ArtNet and so on. Like all of us smaller galleries, we don't actually get as much of the audience as we'd like, because people are moving so fast that they don't have time to dip into that to actually reach us. And it's a real shame, I think. And I'm hoping that through the COVID-19 pandemic, that some of that will change because people will stay a bit more local. At least that's my hope. At least for a bit, to rediscover some of the people that, and the culture that's in their area. Because every city has artists, well, almost every city has artists, or, somewhere close by. So, that's just talking to the point of my intention and my ability to fulfill it. Because like any showmaster, I can only do a show if I have an audience. No audience, no show. Talking to myself is fun, but not always.
Well, getting back to beauty, and
Right.
wasn't that the beginning of the conversation, why beauty is important, or why we live with beauty, or how we create our spaces?
Yeah.
I know right now for me, I'm in the West Village, and on a beautiful day, I can put on my mask and I can go do my essential shopping. I'll bring my iPhone, I'll take some pictures, and I can feel the beauty. But on a day that's not so beautiful, or there's, too many people on the street walking around not wearing masks, which quite frankly pisses me off because I think it's selfish. But I don't know what their motivation is. I mean, if it's political or, they're so into their freedom, they don't want to be told what to do. But I mean, for me, everything I do in my apartment or I have to live around beauty, because especially now, we're stuck in our homes, and for the most part, and it's more important than ever to create beauty in your surroundings. And it's like a filter to life, is how I see art. And if we don't have that filter, I mean, I come from a family of doctors, and, I'm the only artist. And I, have, when my sibling rivalry, I'll say maybe to my younger brother, well, you save lives, but we make life worth living.
Valid point. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure all of us have thought about this at some point, but every single object you touch was designed by somebody.
Right.
Like everything, bar none. I think that's a really fascinating thing. That was, part of what Warhol was doing with the Brillo pad boxes and other things. And I think that's respecting that and honoring that, and understanding that things of beauty are things of beauty. Like, we have bottles which we put flowers in on our table. Which are just simple bottles that was either a wine or schnapps or whatever. Something was in that bottle at some point. It's a beautiful bottle. We put a flower in it and we put it somewhere. Why do we put a flower there? Why do we? It's all these things, and we all do this. Like, there's a group of, there's a segment of society which can't, the messies, the infamous kind of, where everything just like grows out of control. But that's a pathological state, as far as I've understood it, or it borders on that at least. Unless maybe people aren't pathological, they just like living in that. And if they do, then in a kind of, at least for me, hard to understand way, that's them designing their space as well. If that's the beauty that they're looking for and they connect to, the kind of a social inversion of cleanliness, if you will. Yeah. But since Lisa brought us back to the topic of beauty, it would be interesting to hear your and all of your thoughts about why you create beauty in the arts. Like, what's the motivation? One of the things when Taylor and I did our session where he presented his work, which is in the archives in case anyone wants to see it, certainly worth looking at. One of the things I asked him was, what motivates you? Because I say artists are the people who can't help it.
Right.
And at least that's the experience I've had. You know,
Right.
because all the artists who can just draw well, and if they can't make a living at it, then they eventually stop. Or if, you know, a good photographer, and it becomes a hobby or whatever, that's a different gambit. If you're driven,
do you assume that artists are always creating something beautiful?
in the understanding that the beauty is something that the artist deems worth capturing. I'm not defining beauty. I'm using the word as a wrapper for the things of interest.
All right. I mean,
It's a lot easier to say that than to say, why are artists constantly rendering things that they find interesting?
Yeah. So, I mean, an example might be, I don't know if everybody knows, I photographed art back in the 70s, 80s, 90s in Soho. And very early on, I shot Basquiat's work. And his stuff at the time was, in my mind, not beautiful. However, today, a lot of people consider it art, put that in capital letters, and beautiful, as illustrated by the prices, in my mind, as illustrated by the prices they pay for these things. I mean, one of his first paintings in the first show, I go in to document the show, and the woman at the desk says, thank you. The woman at the desk says, Jim, you ought to buy this before it gets expensive. And I go, how much is it? It's $3,500. Well, my rent was $375 a month. So that was what, almost 10 months rent. And I wouldn't consider that beautiful. I mean, it was like, I couldn't understand it. Why would anybody want to hang this on their walls? Why would anybody want it? So, you know, that painting today is probably $10, $12 million. So was that beautiful then? Is that beautiful now?
Well, in Basquiat's case, I like his work a lot.
But
because
in 1981, 82, did you?
I liked it from the beginning because of the content.
Yeah.
Like I like the ideas, you know. I mean, we're different generations, clearly. You know, I'm the post-beard generation, post Fu Manchu. But you know, that shouldn't influence what I wanted to say. Basquiat was, like Vivian Maier, he was a tragic figure who had a forcibly restricted body of work because he died.
Boss, you have a text message.
And he died at a young age for a very tragic reason. Jimi Hendrix is another figure that's similar. Jimi Hendrix is an extraordinary guitarist. But his fame is based on that as well, because he became a tragic figure. And Basquiat was pushed very strongly by a number of very powerful galleries, and that's how those prices went up. You know, one of the aspects of the auction market is that it ends up being a tool for, well, you know, auctions have been used for laundering money for a very long time, but this is, you know, all known information. But it's also a way to transfer funds from one owner to another, because the way, like, if one person buys a picture, then sells it to another person who then is paying for it, and they know, like, it's not legal. So, you know, and I have no evidence of any of this. This is all just pure speculation, right? Pure speculation.
Years ago, that was clear to me that there was money laundering involved in those auctions.
Yeah, because they're bound to a very rigid, and even more so back in the day than now. There was this thing of not being able to, like, they were bound to secrecy. So one person, collector A, would buy a work and would, you know, at 100,000, and then would sell it for $1 million, and then the collector B, who owes collector A money, would pay him through that. And so the way that the money was transferred became easier to deal with in a tax situation, because It could be, particularly if it was being bought through companies and so on, there were ways to, to make that very fiscally reasonable and usable or functional inside of the bookkeeping. And this is part of the reason why the laws around the buying and selling of art have changed, which I'm actually happy about, although it makes my life a bit more difficult to deal with. But the art market, I don't think, is a good place to do that, particularly because if prices get, ratcheted up so quickly this way, first off, it's a game of hot potato. And the last person who has it, basically their only option is to give it to a public collection, which if they do it in Canada, they get an 80% write-off, which means if they, they can pay their taxes by buying a picture for a lot of money, cleaning the money, and paying their taxes with the money that they cleaned that way. So, it's...
Yeah.
Yeah, I know auctions are good, but they were never a place for primary market, or they weren't intentionally, they weren't built to be places for primary market. And that has changed now because they're playing in the marketplace as primary market players. And it makes gallerists' lives a bit difficult because, of course, they have access to all the top collectors, because all the top collectors now buy there. And they can figure out ways to bring works up at auction and then hammer them off really quickly. Like, I don't know if any of you ever sat in a room at one of these major auctions. Some works, they'll be sitting there fishing in the room looking for a buyer. And other times it'll be like, okay, 35,000, going once, going twice, sold. And you're like, what? Like, the last time he waited 5 minutes until he moved on, or not 5 minutes, felt like 5 minutes, probably 20 seconds. So, sorry, I keep running on these tangents. I apologize.
I'm going to have to jet. Great day. Good to see everybody.
It's good to see you, James.
Bye.
See you next Tuesday.
Bye.
Julian, could we go back to intentionalism and what's beauty?
Yes, absolutely.
In reference to, as I recall, in the 70s, Irving Penn did a series of photographs, platinum prints of cigarette butts.
Yes.
And when they first were exhibited, a lot of people were horrified because he was known for exquisite photographs of models for Vogue and all that. But in terms of the imprimatur that the Metropolitan Museum gave in terms of hanging the prints, obviously the value increased also because it was Irving Penn. But he also was inspired or driven to create these photographs because of his horror of having his mentor, Alexei Bronovich, die from cancer, from smoking. So there's an immediate direct relationship to his intentionalism, which may or may not be seen by a casual viewer of the art or the photographs. So I don't know when they first came out in the 70s, whether they were immediately perceived as great examples of art and photographs, or whether until the museum gave it its imprimatur, whether the value of those images immediately skyrocketed.
Well, first off, those are, in my opinion, those are beautiful.
And I've seen the original prints. I thought they were gorgeous.
There's a number of reasons why I love that particular body of work. First off, the idea of looking down and finding things that are laying on the street and, creating, beautiful, almost abstract renderings of them because of the size of the object inside of the frame and all that, so I personally find them beautiful and very engaging. But what you were referring to is the definition, like when does the transition from being an object that was created by either an artist, or when does the object transform or transition into being art? And this is what Brian was also speaking to, saying that when I show something in my gallery, I give it a form of pedigree. And we could argue that in Penn's case, it received a form of pedigree because it was exhibited at some point. And so it certainly has at least the pedigree that somebody out there said, I'm going to put my name on this. I'm going to show this work as art. And I'm going to look for people who agree with me. And that's kind of, you know, always what exhibitions are, is you're looking for, you know, you're creating a rendering of works in a context and hoping that people see and appreciate and understand and agree with the particular rendering that you've chosen to make. The problem is that things, you know, they may be art and then lose their position. Like things become unpopular. Is the work that's become unpopular, is that then no longer art? Is it a one-way street? Like a tattoo? Once you're tattooed with art, you, like, no matter what you do, all you can do is wear a sweater. And that's a tough question, you know, and I wish there were easy answers for these. I don't know. You know, the idea of beauty, my idea of beauty is different from yours. It's different from yours and yours and yours. Well, I'm pointing to all of you. You can't see that I'm pointing to. So, you know, the definition of beauty and or the definition of things that are interesting changes from person to person. And this is clear in the purchasing and in the collecting, in the collecting of work, that no collections are the same, except if they're advised by the same art collector or art advisor, which is how you get some of these corporate collections, which are all very mundane because it's the same kind of, all right, let's hit these check marks. So we have, you know, all of these names in here, and that becomes then the corporate collection. Real collections happen because people love work and they look at it and they engage with it and they're passionate and they find it and they say, yes, this, and this, and this, and I love this. And, you know,
and it's back to not buying art for investment.
Yeah, right. It's, you know, what is it worth, and not, you know, what's its monetary value. So, you know, it's almost, I guess I inadvertently created a giant oil slick, so I'll slip out on, because it's almost impossible to answer precisely, at least. Each person can answer it for themselves, but I haven't, in my own attempts to formulate these things in a complete manner, I haven't been able to formulate them in such a way that they apply to everybody. Not for lack of trying. You know, of course, I as a gallerist and all other gallerists are deeply interested in figuring out what are the mechanics of these, what's the mechanics of aesthetics, how do they work, and desire, you know, and love and loss, and desire being kind of not counterparts, but puzzle parts that fit together, that we're looking to fulfill parts of ourselves in our desires, and the things that we are attracted to represent those things, and the arts or music or food or relationships or all the things that we do that bring us joy fulfill parts of that in us. And I think that that's a very valid thing to do. You know, it's only the church really that's kind of gotten into this thing of it's valid to deny yourself. Human beings and animals in general tend to, particularly animals, don't generally deny themselves. They, you know, they have their mantra, or they not their mantra, they have the things that they do, like beehives or ant farms are very interesting that way. There's a functionality to it, but it's not like none of the ants are sitting there saying, oh, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that. It's like they do what they do. And we people, we run around and we're like, oh, I'm not going to look at that. I'm not going to do that. I'm not gonna, you know, which I find, you know, a little bit bizarre to a degree anyway. So oil slick, I guess. Next time you're gonna have to wear cleats. Maybe in not in closing, but well, actually, sort of in closing. First off, thank you all for being here, particularly for engaging in what is probably one of the most difficult and challenging intellectual exercises in the arts, is understanding the principle of aesthetics and beauty, and your role in it as artists, my role in it as a gallerist, and the people who are watching the show on different platforms will have roles either as one of those two or also as consumers and collectors, which we all have to a degree anyway, necessarily. I apologize that we didn't get to find a concrete answer, but maybe it's better that we didn't. Maybe it's okay that some questions just remain and can be discussed further at a later date. And I see also here Brian had something here to share with us, which I think he's shared with everybody. From William Pohita. Look in the chat. Brian, did you post this to me or to everybody? No, all.
It's to everybody. But
to everybody.
I
Right.
could
have a look in the
share
chat.
this on that one slide. If so that this is the artist I was mentioning a while back. So his paintings are sort of a critique of the art world, but he hits on a lot of the questions we've been asking. So this is a simple canvas that's meant to look like a sheet of notebook paper ripped out, and I'll read a few lines of it, but it's, "Hey collectors, don't worry, this isn't about you, dear Gen Pop plebes, the public, LOL. This is for very rich people who can afford art. Yes, I'm talking to you with the amassed wealth. Oh, come on, we're all here to serve your taste, even if you are a statistically insignificant percent of the population. So sorry, I know the word population is threatening so many of us. We know you are the only ones with a cognitive surplus for art. Most people don't have the time, money, and education, the trifecta." So it goes on like that, but he has a very tongue-in-cheek critique of the art world and of collecting and of making art and of going to art fairs and circulating in galleries, and it's fun and fascinating what he does, but he also has a podcast about some of those topics.
Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you.
And it was great to see all of you, some new faces, some old faces, some joined in, some didn't, but that's good. Whoever and whatever, I'm not forcing anything on anybody. Good to see you.
Thank
I'll
you.
be back next Tuesday, same bad time, same bad channel.
Thank you, Julian.